Hello and welcome to PETV Presentations Season 1, Episode 11. Today we have joining with us Scott Gallant, who's going to be talking about hosting and teaching educational groups and students. Scott is an agroforester and food system designer, as well as the lead permaculture design instructor on site at Rancho Mastatal in Costa Rica. We're really happy to have Scott with us today. He has a great deal of experience teaching students, and we hope you learn a lot from them. Thank you very much for being here today with us, Scott. Go ahead and take it from here.
Yeah, so a little bit more about myself. As Josiah said, I'm from a little town in Ohio. Never really got into working with the soil or permaculture or anything like that until after I graduated from college and spent some time traveling in Central America. Visited with various education centers in that process and eventually ended up at Rancho Mastatal. I've been down there now. This upcoming year will be my 8th year, I believe. I'm 30 years old, so it's pretty much been my entire adult life, which is a bit incredible to think about for myself. In addition to the ranch, I spend about a month of the year at a project in Nicaragua called Project Bonafide. That's run by two really good friends of mine, Chris Shanks and Mitch Haddad. Chris has been a really big mentor for myself as I've started training to be the lead instructor for our permaculture design courses. In addition to that, a couple of years ago, I spent about 5 months at Versaland Farm out in Iowa, run by Grant Schultz. And I think Grant's going to be doing one of these presentations in a couple of weeks. And was there when we were really first implementing some workshops and groups, bringing in Darren Doherty, and some other instructors for farm scale permaculture and some farm scale keyline GIS workshops. I've worked at a couple education centers in the States, predominantly one in Massachusetts called Round the Bend Farm, a center for restorative community. I helped write their business plan that centered around bringing groups there and did the fundraising to really get that farm-based education center off the ground. All in all, I'm really passionate about the education side of permaculture. There's really not too much more exciting for me, except maybe seeing one of my trees flower and fruit for the first time, than having a group like high school kids come in and introduce them to something really simple like a composting toilet and just having it click for them and see them take that away back to their part of the world and know that of all those kids, maybe the 20 that were in that class, one or two of those that's really going to stick with, and that's going to be a moment that carries with them for the rest of their life. So for me, whether education is the primary part of your work or a supplemental part, it feels incredibly worthwhile, incredibly valuable, and it's, again, something I'm really passionate about, and I hope that comes across during this little talk. Let's see. Yeah, so it's a little bit about myself. I'm happy to answer more questions in the Q&A at the end. And then a bit about the ranch where I work. So we are located in rural Costa Rica. It's really the true humid tropics. We have about a 8-month rainy season, 4-month dry season, get 4 to 6 meters of rain a year, which is kind of incredible when you're sitting there and experiencing an 8-inch rain event for maybe multiple days on end. It's definitely something to experience. The ranch was founded in 2001 by a couple from the States, Tim O'Hara and Robin Nunez. And they originally met in the Peace Corps in Uruguay, and they founded the ranch with some of the same ethics of their experience in Uruguay. And it really was from day one an education center. And so I'll emphasize that that's what we are. We're an education center. We're a farm second. We're a community second. And from their first, I think maybe 3 weeks after they opened their door in November 2001, they had their first group arrive on what was then a pretty small and bare bones campus. It was a group of students from indigenous students from inland Alaska. And essentially from that group on, we've had groups in all sorts of capacities and forms coming through the ranch. And that is our business model. That's what drives our revenue stream. Groups, it's a really diverse group. So we have, universities, colleges, high school, middle schools, all coming down to do everything from studying tropical ecology, learning about Costa Rican culture, doing community service, to really learning about natural building, sustainability, permaculture, fermentation, some of the skills that we really encompass there and we practice on a daily basis. In addition to that, we host our own workshops, and so that'll be stuff like the PDC, like a natural building course that we have coming up in April. And those can be anything from someone who's on our team, we call our core team, like myself, or an outside instructor that we bring in. And I'll talk a little bit more about why you might choose some of those scenarios versus others, and pros and cons to those. And then finally, we have a pretty epic apprenticeship program. It runs 11 months. It's highly competitive. I personally think it's one of the best things we do, in that it attracts students from all over the world. There's like 5 to 7 spots a year, and it is kind of the backbone of our day-to-day work. And that program evolved from just a little volunteer program where folks could come for, I don't know, I think originally back in the day it was any amount of time, then it became a week, etc., and transitioned up to now this really kind of deep level of learning that takes place over a year. That's worked out really well for us. Yeah, the ranch, this is our team, and it really is a team that allows us to function. Kind of everybody brings different skills to the table. In addition to the 6 of us that you see here, there's an amazing TICO staff. We're the largest employer in the region by far. And then with our apprentices in tow, plus groups and workshops, we routinely are hosting, feeding and providing beds for 30 to 35 people. We probably have close to 700 people coming through every year. So it's a small project, but it's busy, it's full in a lot of ways. So that's just a brief intro to the ranch. And what we're going to cover now, this is just a short outline as I was sitting and thinking about this lecture over the last week. I was trying to pull out really big lessons that I feel like I've learned in my 8 years kind of in this industry. And so I'll talk about some of those. And those will really encompass kind of setting up, bringing these programs in, dealing with students, having them on site before they get there. And so we'll go through those lessons and jump around. And then I'll talk briefly about some of the lessons we've learned on facility design, program design, and then that transition we made from a short-term volunteer program to a longer-term apprenticeship. And I guess, again, just the lessons that we've picked up. I guess as I think about this, explaining it now, this is really kind of a case study of what's worked for us. The reality is, like, everybody's going to come to this from a different place. And I want to emphasize that my experience, while I do have some in the States, is almost all, like, my deep experience is in Central America. And so doing this work in the States or wherever you're coming from, Europe, there will be legal components, regulatory components that are, in my opinion, not as strong where we are, or not as enforced. And I'll touch upon some of those things that I know about, but I'm really not an expert in that, unfortunately. Or I'm pretty happy that I'm not. That way I don't have to deal with the regulatory aspect of this. So again, this comes down to understanding where you're at now and where you're trying to get to. There's so many ways to incorporate education into your farm, your site, your life. It's really a huge topic. You could be talking about just bringing in small groups for afternoon classes. You could be talking about the classic 2-week PDC course, and everything in between, and scaling up from there. There's really ample ways to approach education. I think what's so important for everybody to understand is you really have to be passionate about this. I sometimes get frustrated when I talk to people trying to set up projects, particularly down in Costa Rica, again, where I spend most of the time, and they view maybe an internship program as solely a revenue stream. And while it could potentially be that if it was set up properly. I think the place you have to come from to do this well, to be successful, is when we're really passionate about educating the next farmers, the next permaculture designers, the next homesteaders. And if that's what you're excited about, then I think it makes sense to incorporate some of these programs. Another piece of advice that I'll give when you're looking at where you want to be is really understanding the type of kind of, I guess, living situation or business that you're setting up. And so I mentioned that we are an education center. And a few years ago, when we were going through kind of our strategic planning in our own haphazard fashion, there was a fair amount of confusion in our small group about whether we were an education center, whether we were a farm, whether we were a community. And kind of everybody in the group had different interests in that, being a community, or they really wanted it to be a farm. And after a lot of back and forth, we realized our infrastructure, our business model, we were an education center. We have a working farm on our site, and we are a community, but it wasn't designed that way. And so if you're starting this process, really thinking about, is education a supplement, or is education the focus? It's going to change how you would design your land. It's going to change the language that you would use in agreements between your team, between interns or apprentices you might bring in. And so that was something that once we kind of settled back and relaxed into, like, oh yeah, we're in the education realm, which means we're in the hospitality field. Okay, how do we do that really well? And so again, thinking about that, maybe you're just a farm that's going to offer a couple like killer weekend workshops. Great, understand that it's going to be really different than a lot of the experience that we have. We're offering these big multi-day courses, or having people on our site constantly, throughout the year, dozens and dozens of people. It's a different experience, right? Okay. So the big lessons that I mentioned, for me, these were the 4 big lessons that I pulled out thinking about this topic. And the first is kind of the classic permaculture principle: start small and transition. There's no reason to overreach when you're doing this. I'll have some good examples in our experience of kind of slowly working our way into programs. So we'll talk about each of these in depth in the next couple of slides. The next is breadth versus depth. So what type of learning are you going to be offering? I think of this often as a scale from inspiration to like hard skill building. And a shorter term workshop might just touch upon a topic like beekeeping or mushroom cultivation. You're not like really preparing somebody to, say, become a beekeeper, but you're giving them a touch into that, an interest in it. And that alone might be exactly the type of education that you're prepared to offer. It might meet your capacity or your strength really well. So we'll talk about that more. The third, functional versus demonstration. This speaks toward the type of site and systems you're actually going to build. I think what a lot of people who are interested in educating through their site, they're interested in building a didactic, a learning site where the students are, really participatory. And so how you go about building those systems, there's a couple different ways to do that, and I'll go into more depth. And then last, which we'll probably talk about the most, is managing expectations and meeting needs. And this is really just communication from that first kind of putting yourself out there and marketing to students, to having them come on the site. What are some of the things that we've learned that work really well for us? Okay, so let's look at the first one. Start small and transition. Concept of phases of development. Really understanding your capacity, I think, is the key for this, and finding leverage points that are going to allow you to scale up as you desire. So, for example, our permaculture course, the ranch has been in operation for about 15 years now. And I think our first course was offered about 7 or 8 years into the program. And Tim and Robin, I think, did a really good job of understanding that they wanted the site again to be a learning site. They wanted students to enter, learn about gray water, walk through a gray water system, take apart the pipes, smell it, see what's working, see what's not working. And we didn't have all those systems in place, right, in those first 7 years. At some point, they were like, all right, we're ready for this. And so they brought in an outside instructor, Chris Shanks of Project Bonafide, who I mentioned earlier. And so Chris took over the course. He did a great job. He did that for a couple of years, and then he approached myself as a member of the ranch to start training and take over the course from him, kind of design himself out of that system. And now, kind of incredibly for myself, I run the permaculture course. We have an incredible team that supports me in all the ways that you can imagine. And if you were just to look at that and the success we have with that class, you would miss all of those years of working up toward that and starting small and transitioning toward that. And in that process, we're able to hone in our skills, right? And so if you have the chance just to, again, have a small, say, 2-hour afternoon workshop on starting seeds or lacto-fermented veggies, like whatever it is that you're interested in teaching, or you have the knowledge to teach, if you have people on your site for 2 hours, this is a chance to understand some of the intricacies of that. Do you have enough parking? Is it something that's going to disturb traffic patterns in your neighborhood? Can you handle just the water that people need? Is there enough, is the bathroom adequate? All these little things. And what you'll quickly realize is that in that little 2-hour slot, when you're starting small, you'll go, yep, we can do this well. And then you'll pick out the ones that like, ooh, yeah, we really need to work on that for that to work well. Or we need a second composting toilet, or our water system cannot handle more than 10 people. Now you understand some of your limits or what you need to work on. And so I think that's really important. And last is just, in my experience, is really being adaptable. A couple years ago, a few things happened on our site that caused me to rethink, wrongly in hindsight, how we should offer workshops. And originally, we mostly focused on university groups, college groups. And a couple years ago, some of those groups started going, because we were full, to other ecotourism projects in Mastatal. There's 3 other community-run projects. We were happy about that. Spread the wealth. We were already full during, mostly during the spring break period, I remember. And that kind of opened up our schedule later in the year a little bit. So we started offering what we called kind of applied permaculture courses. These are shorter workshops. I think we had a biochar class, biodigester design and construction, indigenous skills, things like that, 3-day, 4-day classes. Now, to me, it was much more exciting to offer those classes than the university groups, that some of the kids are into what we're doing, some aren't. And in my mind, I was like, this is what we're going to do. We're going to transition to just offering these amazing short classes year round. And it's a great idea. But what we quickly learned is that those classes would fill in year one, because expats in Costa Rica, they would sign up like crazy. But that market is relatively limited. And year 2, we'd get nothing. And we suddenly were like, oh, maybe we should focus a bit more on these university groups. And we've kind of come back full circle again. I've closed myself off, put on the blinders a bit, got excited about something and lost, fortunately not in any way that affected us, but in my mind, I wasn't flexible anymore. And I think one of the great things about our organization, being a small organization, being quick, is that we are adaptable. And so if a group approaches us at any time of the year and they are interested in bringing a group, we can often accommodate them. We can work them into the schedule. And so don't get it stuck in your mind that you're only going to host university groups, or you're only going to do afternoon workshops, because if you're open, there might be more stuff out there. That's worked well for us. Let me see. So breadth versus depth. This speaks to, knowing your strengths and knowing your audience. When you're starting off and you're offering most likely shorter term programs, it's probably going to be a bit broader, a bit more on the inspiration side, where you really don't have time to go super deep into topics. You're not providing a really technical level of training. What we've found is that early on in the ranch, the volunteer program is a perfect example. If somebody's just there for a week, we're going to introduce them to a few topics, but there's very little advantage for us to train them in timber framing, for example. Now, if somebody's there for a whole year, we can really go deeper and they can get into the square rule and mortise and tenon and tool maintenance and all that, the aspect that goes with that particular skill. Part of that's your audience, and part of that's also what you enjoy and what you're really good at. And so Tim and Robin, the ranch founders, they are very charismatic people, and they're just okay planners. I think they'd agree with that. I don't know if they'll get the chance to watch this, maybe at some point. And what that meant is that they really built programs to that strength. They built programs that revolved around people coming in and them giving like really personal attention to everybody who comes through our doors. And they still do this, and it's quite incredible. Now, there was a con to that. It led to very inspirational moments. People would step away with this really like powerful experience, but it also meant that a lot of people weren't really picking up the skills that we ideally wanted to transfer to people, just in our kind of effort to re-educate, if you will, reskill the global population. And it wasn't until our team built, and myself and my partner Laura, who you see in the picture in front of you, during her fermentation workshop, when our team built and grew, Nick and Rachel joined our team on a more permanent basis. We now had the capacity and the diversity of strengths to start offering these really longer term, deeper programs that all of us, it's really what we want to teach. That's what I enjoy teaching. I'd rather spend 3 days in the nursery with somebody instead of an hour workshop in the nursery, as an example. Let's see if I'm missing anything that I want to cover. Looks good. But just an example of some of the deeper skills. Again, we don't teach somebody who's just coming in for 2 days how to cut joinery on furniture. This is somebody who's enrolled in our 11-month apprenticeship program. So the third big lesson I've taken away from my time at the ranch is the difference between functional and demonstration-based systems. One of the things that we've done really well is we've built our campus with students. So here in this photo, you see a picture. This is from this year. This is the State University of New York, their environmental science and forestry program. And for the last, I think, 3 years, they brought a class called ecological engineering in the tropics. And here they are building walls, a technique called wattle and daub. This is in our new food processing kitchen. And so these students now, they get the chance to, they get hands-on, right? So it's like a really physical experience that I think most people today are craving that. There's a dearth of that. And they're learning about the chemistry, the biology, the physics of this wall system, what's actually happening with these different materials. They're learning that it's something that they can do themselves, so it's very empowering. And it's a very functional educational moment. We're actually getting the walls built, and somebody's paying us to build those walls. Like, that works really well for us. You can get a lot of your campus or your site built in this way if you do it well. The flip side is you can end up with a lot of demonstration systems. And so demonstration systems are different than functional systems for myself, in that they're built for demonstration's sake. So the previous slide was a picture of one of our former goats. I believe it was Ollie, actually. And we, right about when I first got to the ranch, we got a couple of goats. And everybody loved the goats, right? They're super smart. They're fascinating creatures. For a lot of us, it was the first time around large mammals. We love goat milk. We like to make goat cheese. And when a student comes in or a guest comes in for 3 or 4 days, they go milk the goat for the very first time. Like, that's a powerful moment. People are, as we know, are really disconnected from systems like that. And that was a type of moment that we were interested in cultivating. The problem was, for those of us that were spending a long time with that system, we realized pretty quickly that it didn't have a real function. It wasn't well designed. It didn't fit in with our agro ecosystem. I won't go into the details of it. You can ask about that, I suppose. And it was basically a demonstration system. It was a petting zoo. And the amount of work that it took to get a gallon of milk became a bit absurd. We realized we needed to phase that system out. And we're hopefully going to introduce pigs in a few years, and that will be hopefully a really well-designed system, really functional, and through its functionality will demonstrate what we want it to demonstrate. And so that's the difference. Of course, the advantage of that goat system was that we had something what I like to call show your warts. We could show something that didn't work very well. And often that's the best way to learn. And it was a great challenge to ask people, why don't you think this system works? And to try to have them figure it out and to think beyond, that short experience they had at 6 a.m. when they were milking the goats and everything was perfect. So again, just to sum that up, because I think it's really valuable, when you go to build your systems, don't necessarily think about them as educational systems, as demonstration systems. Make them functional, and in their functionality, they will be educational. Okay. Managing expectations and meeting needs. So this is from the moment you touch base with your students to when they're on site and everything in between. I think of this as from marketing to pre-arrival to being on site, and then I just have some comments about instructors. So for us, what we found for marketing, we've been around for a while, so we get a lot of word of mouth. That works out well for us. And the best advice I can have is, or what we use and what works well for us, Facebook is great. We try to have a really active and educational Facebook page. As an educational organization, we feel that the content we put out through Facebook and then also through our blog should be informative. Now, we kind of roll by the 80-20 rule. 80% is content, 20% is promotion, letting people know about a workshop or sign up for our blog. So that's worked really well. Collecting emails, you guys probably know that one, but if you don't, just gathering emails is great. You're going to always have those. MailChimp's a great service to set up email blasts. I think it's free if you have under 1,000, which hopefully you'll blow past that with a little bit of work. And in all of that, what I think has served us really well in our marketing efforts is we've been really careful not to overpromise things. We don't want anybody coming to our site thinking that it is perfect, thinking that we grow all of our own food, thinking that it's a luxury permaculture boutique hotel and there's going to be folded towels on your pillows. We're not that. We try to be really clear of what we are and what we're not. And I think we've all seen a lot of projects and instructors and sites promise a lot and claim a lot in their marketing materials. And my experience is, if you're doing something really well, then you don't have to do that. People are going to recognize that you're trying hard, that you're on a path toward putting something really solid together. And so don't feel the need to stretch what you're doing. Just lay it out there and then over deliver. Always over deliver if you can. Make sure there's extra coffee, that the food is great. Some of those little details that we'll talk about in a second. Pre-arrival, this gets down to good communication. Some of the stuff that's worked well for us is setting up Facebook groups for students. Again, this is for like a longer course, our natural building course. It's 10 days. Set up a Facebook group. They can communicate ahead of time, get to know each other, figure out rides and getting to our site together. And something that people love is pre-arrival reading resources. Started doing that this past year in our permaculture course and just got great feedback. It really wasn't very hard to do. Probably a lot of us have big banks of PDFs of permaculture books and documents. Just putting that in a Dropbox and sharing that with students as they sign up, or just having a link on your site, is a great way to start getting people engaged, and they feel right away that they're getting value for what they're paying for, which is really important, right? So once they're on site, this is when you shift into hospitality mode and recognize that you're in the hospitality industry. And now you might be just the host. You might be the host and the teacher. Um, Understanding the difference in those roles, recognizing that difference. What's worked well for us is focusing on providing the basic necessities and doing that really well. So there's always a lot of food. It's good. Sometimes it's great, but it's always good. We're good about meeting people's dietary restrictions. We really go out of our way to care for people in that regard. We're blessed with a lot of water on our site. I've been to projects, I've sat through courses where it was a pain in the butt to get enough water to fill your bottle. And people get a little bit dehydrated, get a little bit upset. Make sure make sure you don't have that as an issue. Decent sleeping arrangements can be, we'll talk about that in facilities, but that really can be anything. But what people need is a bit of privacy. They need to be comfortable, protection from the elements, and then cleanliness and safety. This group that we're looking at here was a high school group that I was guiding in the country. As soon as they got in, one of the kids got sick, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And it was a bummer for the whole trip. They all recovered before the end, and it all was good. But the reality was it took a toll on them. And I don't think it happened at our place, but it certainly could have. And making sure you're like really strict and cognizant about the best way to keep stuff sanitary and clean is worth thinking about significantly. When they're on site, building time in for networking, social space. Everybody wants that. It's always worth taking out. In our permaculture course, again, as an example, shortening a lecture so that there's more time for people to share what they're doing. Something that we got great feedback on recently that I hadn't really thought about was just the difference in women's needs. So our site, most students stay in a bunkhouse that is not super private. We're working on adding more space to that, more infrastructure that'll alleviate that problem. But a couple of the women emphasized that they would have preferred to have a space, or at least a better space to change clothes. And the door in the bathroom is kind of non-existent. We're in the tropics, open air structures. And so for a lot of people, for a couple of the ladies, I should say, they emphasized that they thought we could do a better job of providing more privacy, which was wonderful feedback. It was something that I hadn't really thought about. So that's just another consideration. On site, in the classroom, waiting for students. This is something that happens a lot for us. You're expecting 15 students to show up, and the last one is on the way. They're going to be there in 30 minutes. What do you do? Just having a strategy, whatever it is, for that 30 minutes instead of sitting there awkwardly in front of the class, which I've done, and then realized I needed a strategy. And I have a couple simple games that I will play now, and just to keep people busy without getting too deep and setting that student behind. Quick thought on instructors. If you are bringing in outside instructors and you're going to be doing more of the hospitality side of things, what I really recommend is thinking about how do you make it so they can focus on teaching and interacting with the students, and they don't have to make sure that student X is having their dietary needs met, that student Y has a safe place to lock up their valuables. You want them to just be able to focus on teaching. And something that we do really well at the ranch because we bring in a lot of outside instructors, so we're handling all that back end stuff. Think about the instructors that you're bringing in. Do you work well with them? That's worth trying to figure out beforehand. Do they kind of fit your energy? We've had some great teachers who are super stressful to have on site. They end up being really needy. They're not super organized. They're awesome with the students. Students love them, but from our end, it can be really stressful to have them there. And then we've had the opposite. And we've kind of worked through all sides of that and have learned how to manage that better. But the more that you can do to figure out, do I work well with this teacher ahead of time, is going to be better. All right, I'm going to take a quick drink of water. Just some slides from a couple of our recent workshops. Okay, so facility and accommodation design. Again, there's so many different ways you can bring groups to your site. You might not ever be hosting people like we are. This is our bunkhouse. This works really well for us. In the tropics, camping isn't my favorite option. Think of the rain, there's snakes, bugs, things like that. The temperate climate seems to work really well for a lot of big projects, and people that are hosting large groups is having a good camping site. There are perhaps some legal ramifications of this. The farm in Massachusetts, Round the Bend Farm, when we were writing the business plan and we were looking into their ability to host groups, just in a camping capacity or eventually perhaps a bunkhouse or small cabins, we ran into issues around the capacity of the well, capacity of the septic, traffic on the road, etc. And it didn't stop us from hosting those groups, but what we decided to do is to really focus on day workshops for the first couple of years with a couple kind of overnight programs that are very community oriented. So there are programs like AmeriCorps, for example, programs that were working with youth from the inner city in the nearby town of New Bedford. And so stuff that the community could really get behind. And that seemed to be a good way to slowly get around some of those legal pieces. Whether you're setting up a bunkhouse or you're doing camping, there's really good design strategies. And the biggest things are just thinking about flow of people, movement of people. The two big things that we've learned is separating like your public and your private spheres. There's nothing worse for me than having a bunch of students walk by my house when they don't need to. There's no reason they should. It's very off to the side, and I've been on a lot of projects where, for whatever reason, that path walks right by somebody's house, and that person is not super excited about it. So thinking about that flow, and then keep people out of the kitchen. That is always a good strategy. Students, when they first come in, are going to be excited about the food. It's often what brings everybody together, right? Figure out a way in your design to make sure that they cannot enter into that space unless you need them to help clean up, for example. If you're setting up a camping facility, take the time to design that really well. I would say take the same amount of time that you would put into, say, building a building for a bunkhouse. figuring out where the fire pit's going to go, where the different campsites, maybe there's an outdoor shower, a sink basin, a clothesline, etc. The flow and movement of that, making sure that people don't have to walk right by the showers or right by the composting toilet every time they go between the classroom and their tent site. So some common sense stuff, but it's worth taking the time to do that if you're going to bring groups onto your site. So there's some buildings. We have at the bunkhouse, and then we also have a couple private structures that are upgrades. So that's worked really well for us. So if couples come, or generally older students that are interested in upgrading out of the bunkhouse, this is an option. For example, there's a bamboo structure. This shows some of the work that we do. This is a timber frame cabin. This is kind of a mix of everything. There's like round wood building. There's some earthen walls in here. And so you get an idea of some of the different living options that people have when they come into our space. Again, pretty unique. May or may not apply for you, but perhaps interesting to look at, I hope. So let's see, program design. I think this just gets back to what you want to do, what you're interested in, your capacity, and the idea of starting small. There's so many things that you can get into, right? What we've encountered a lot is people come to us and like, I want to run a PDC at my place. That happens a lot, and I have to have the talk with them so that they understand the market for that particular course in Costa Rica is extremely saturated. There's probably 30 courses offered a year in that tiny little country. You go up to Nicaragua, there's one course offered a year. So maybe that's more viable. And so I don't necessarily try to talk people out of it, but I explain that reality. So understanding your market and understanding that you might be able to put a twist on that. So for example, when I was working at Versaland with Mr. Grant Schultz, we were conversing prior to my arrival about, he was curious what I thought about hosting a PDC there. And it felt like a lot. It was his first year, full year on site. There was no infrastructure in place, no permanent infrastructure. And my suggestion was to do a shorter course focused more on what he had a particular interest in. And so he ended up designing this farm scale permaculture course, which was super successful. I think they've done that since, and that implies to me that it's been really successful. So focusing in on, again, what you do really well, shortening that down, that worked, I think, really well for Versaland. And the other approach that I can't recommend enough is tying in with universities or colleges. They do the marketing for you. When I talked about the biochar course and the applied permaculture courses, indigenous skills, biodigester design, et cetera, that I got really excited about, I was excited to do the marketing work year one, but year two, year three, it becomes a chore to get the word out on those classes. You have to really kind of do the grind of Facebook and social media, and communicating with your networks, flyering, et cetera. A university, on the other hand, does all that work for you. So every year, Villanova University, SUNY, there's half a dozen more that escape off the top of my head right now. They fill their class. They come down with 8 to 22 students, and we don't have to do anything except meet them at the airport or at our door. And if you can tie in with a professor, and I think it really comes down to building a relationship with an individual professor, someone who will champion your site and the student's ability to learn on your site something that they can't learn in a classroom setting. You can find that prof. That's your key. They'll get excited. And universities are, well, some universities are at a place where they're really looking for that. There's a general understanding that how our traditional educational models working, well, doesn't work very well. There's some parts of it that are failing, in my opinion. I think there's a general understanding of that. So they're looking for alternatives, and what you want to offer, what we offer, is exactly that. And so people can get really excited for that. There are other ways to partner up. Organizations in this part, I'm currently in Vermont, and so the Northeast Farming Association, for example, NOFA. Up in Maine, there's MOFGA. There are organizations like that that are constantly looking for host sites for workshops, and they can really help you facilitate those, especially when you're just starting off. I think that's a great way to kind of get into this field and bringing some students onto your site. Other options that are becoming increasingly popular in my experience are semester programs. So that's something that we're looking at actively. We're trying to develop a semester program. And then festivals. And even though it's not my crowd or my scene, despite my long hippie hair, a lot of projects, I think, bring in a significant amount of revenue, putting in the dirty work of hosting small day-long or 2-day or 3-day festivals. And if that is something you're passionate about, and you can team up with maybe the right people, such as there's an organization called New Mundo out there, then you are, I think, in a position to bring in some decent revenue through that particular stream. Kind of outside of education, but you could certainly spin that. Okay, so that's kind of everything I wanted to cover with program design. And last topic, I think we're doing about just right timing wise, is looking at our volunteer and apprenticeship program. So again, I'll just remind folks that I work in Costa Rica, and the legal side of hosting farm work stays, farm interns, is very different in the States. And I don't have a lot of information on their experience. If you're in the Northeast, smallfarms.org has a lot of great info on how to do that well and stay within your legal parameters. Seems to vary state by state. And essentially, as soon as a volunteer or intern or apprentice is doing an activity that affects your farm's bottom line, then they are considered a farm employee. And the ways around that are mostly through proving that you're providing an equal education for the value that they are contributing to your farm. That's all I'll say about that. But smallfarms.org is a great resource if you need to know more. For us and this program and the great transition from short-term volunteers to an 11-month apprenticeship, it was really about understanding our goals. And we have, in a lot of ways, a big project with a lot of living systems, a lot of moving parts. And we kept finding that the longer people were on site, the more competent they became. It's kind of common sense, but it's something that you want to strive for. We take the time now to interview everybody, sometimes multiple times. If you can do that, it's completely worthwhile. And we're really good about communication ahead of time. We have, I think, a 15-page document that lays out what daily life is like. If somebody's coming to your place to stay for a week, they can put up with everything. As long as there's plenty of food and there's water and there's good people around, they can deal with small incomforts. The longer they're there, those incomforts grow, and you really need people to be prepared for them, or you need to be ready to make those disappear, if you will. So yeah, this comes down to your goals, what you're trying to get out of this program. Are you just trying to get somebody to help you weed the garden? That's very different than what we're trying to accomplish. It is a revenue program for us. For 11 months, we charge about $5,000. That includes 3 workshops and full room and board. We think it's the best deal out there. And so those might be very different goals, and we market it very specifically because of that. And then just understanding the give and take of this. If you're going to bring people on, you really have a responsibility to provide them something in the form of education. Um, Seen a lot of wolf farms that are just horrible about this, and it's really tough to see that. Um, so I don't recommend people bring in volunteers unless they're serious about teaching them, and they have the time to do so and really putting that time in. We put a lot of time into our program, we get a lot out of it. And then just really clear agreements. And so people know what they are putting in, what they're getting out. The more that that is written out, the better. And I think one of the other things we've learned really well is just having somebody in charge, knowing who their point person is on the farm has worked really well for us. Our program used to be pretty ambiguous, and we had this idea that everybody who came in would kind of want to figure it out on their own, figure out what they wanted to do. We left it very open. And I think it was our response away from the conventional educational system that is very structured. What we found is that people need that structure. There's great value in that. And the more we've structured our program, the more we've gotten out of it. And now we have, what I think is a really awesome apprenticeship and works really well for us. It meets a lot of our goals. And I think that's about it. So I'm going to just wrap up really quick here. Just a quick plug. You can go to our website here at ranchomastatal.com. These are some of our upcoming workshops. We'll be accepting apprentice applicants for 2018, starting in January. Natural building in April, permaculture in the end of April, and my partner's awesome fermentation class about midway through May. And if anybody's looking for an escape down to tropical Costa Rica or wants to see how we run these classes in person, this is a great opportunity, in my opinion. So that's everything I have. So I'm going to go ahead and exit out of my screen here, and I'll let Josiah take it from there. So thank you guys for the time and for coming and listening to me.
That was a great summary of a lot of information, and I'd like to get into a lot more detail on some of those. So what we'll do now is our poll. So if you could just answer the poll that pops up on your screen, that'd be greatly appreciated. I'll leave it open until the very end so you guys can wait to vote or change your vote as we go.